Hey everyone, welcome to my next lesson about parameters in Revit API. Make sure to watch all the previous parts. And before getting started, if you want to learn all topics regarding Revit API in depth and enroll in my paid Revit API course, you can reach out to me via email in the pinned comment. So make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, like the video, and leave some comments. So let's get going. We have covered a lot about manipulating with parameters, right? So we know how to add parameters to a document. We know how to work with the shared parameter file, how to create groups, definitions in there. We looked at the difference between definition and a parameter. Now it's time for us to refactor everything a bit and make everything readable. It's crucially important. It doesn't matter whether you work on your own or you work in a company with someone. It's kind of really crucially important. It's vital to make everything readable. It's really complex to make it as if it was a book, right? So read it as if it's a book. So everything is pretty easy to understand and comprehend. But we will try our best to make that happen. So this is our end result, like what we're doing. And here, again, what I want to do is to make everything from scratch, started from scratch and go step by step. And our process starts with creating a shared parameter file, right? So we're creating a shared parameter file, then we're adding groups, external definitions, and then we're adding this to document. And let's see if that is readable. So we have our application. We know that our share parameter file is used widely, right? So it's not just specific to document. You can use like different files for document, but usually when you connect this, it's application wide. So we're uh, using our application and we're saying, you know what? I want to create a share parameter file and make that to this path. So here I'm specifying the path and actually a very easy way to specify the path. As you can see, that's the path. And as you can see here, I have no txt files with the name shared because I want to create it. But how to easy get the path is to hold on Shift key and you'll be able to copy as path. So when you click it, now you can easily, for example, go var a and make it this way. So it's pretty easy. So that's, oops, yeah. So here we're saying, you know what? I don't have any shared parameter files. I want to create one. Then I'm saying once I have the shared parameter file, I want to create a group for this. So I'm creating group, for example, like architecture or structural. Then we're saying once I have the group, I want to add external definitions to it. And here I'm passing definition configs. And here this is our own interface. It's not what Revit API provides us with. It's the interface and the implementation of that interface. These classes, definition configs, their responsibility is to store the name of the parameter and the type. Because when we want to create external definitions, what are two most important things that we need to know about is the name of the parameter and the type of this. Of course, like if you think about this, if we add only one external definition, we can simply create a method that will take two parameters, like name and parameter type. But what if you have like a list of them? You can use tuples, but I like to use my own classes instead. So make that as descriptive as possible. So we're simply creating a very simple class that tells us the name and the type of it. So we're creating external definition and then we're trying to add this to a document. This is what I meant about being really truthful about what your method does. What do I mean by this? If you're saying add to document, that means that if something happens, for example, what if that parameter already exists there? If that happens, for example, you may get an exception. And that would be right because you told that this method should add it to a document. That means it should actually do the job. So it should add this to a document. But in my case, what it does that if it cannot add this, it will simply skip it. For example, if you're adding external definitions that have been already predefined, it will skip them. So this is what I mean by being really truthful and explicit about what your method does. In our case, it's trying to add to document. It's not just adding because, for example, if I have 5 external definitions, if I name this add to document, that means I should add 5 definitions. But it may be not the truth, not the true. So this is what that looks like, and everything reads pretty easily to me, right? We're saying create your parameter, saying create group, saying create the external definitions, add them. So add to where? To document, what categories to use, whether it should be instance or type parameter, and what group that should be under. So pretty much all the information that we would pass manually. Now we need to go through each of them and kind of understand what it does. So if I go to the first method called create shared parameter, how I can go to this is that I can click Control comma, and this is a great way of navigating. I really like this one. This is the way I avoid using my mouse almost at all. I prefer using my keyboard to mouse. So here you can type, for example, create shared parameter. And as you can see, it finds it. Not only does it find it, but it can also navigate you to that. And this way you can analyze how everything works. So for example, here we're creating an extension method because we know that we only Revit API provides us with all classes and methods, like all of this stuff is amazing because we can reuse the code that Revit API's developers provided to us, but the main problem is that we cannot go inside that class and make some tweaks to this. We cannot make some modifications to it. So what we do instead is that we create extension methods, and for this you need to follow a particular pattern, like you need to make that class static, you need to make all of the methods statics, and the first argument is going to be the class that you want to extend. We should prefix this with this. So this way you can use it from the application class. So for example, right now I have application and I can use this method on the given class. So as you can see, what I do here is that I perform validations. This is something that is really important. Whenever you have methods and you look at the parameters that you pass in there, you need to make sure that they're not null. It's really important. So here we're doing the validation. We're checking if they're null, and if they're null, we're throwing an exception. Why are we doing this? For example, here I can easily pass null and compiler says nothing to me because we have nullable types and non-nullable. For example, if I go string A, I can easily assign my string to some value, but I can also say that that A can equal to null. And everything works. Nothing is thrown at me. Nothing is thrown at me. It's crucially important. But if I put like double B and say null, it's not going to work because it's a primitive type that cannot be set to null. So what is the takeaway from this? What you need to learn from this is that if you don't know what is the primitive type and what is the reference type, you need to Google primitive types versus reference types. Also, you need to know what is the nullable type and what is the not nullable type. This way you will understand which values can be set to null and which one cannot. So this is crucially important so you understand what is null, what is not null, what can be null, what can possibly be null, and what cannot be. So here, the main idea what we're doing is that we're checking their null. We're also checking if file already exists. So I can use file, and I'm using the system IO namespace for this. So I'm checking if that equals to, if that path already exists. And if that is true, I also throw an exception because I want to create a new file, right? Here, I don't have this file, but I want to have this txt file in this direction. And I'm simply setting the property of my application that is called share parameter file name. It has setter, so I'm saying, you know what, I want to use that. And as a return, I want to get my definition file so I can start working with this. Also, what you may ask is that, oh, here we're using the using keyword. We kind of we get used to using this a lot when it comes to working with transactions. And why we can use it here because it implements iDisposable interface. You need to learn more about this if you want to understand this in depth. So basically what it does in the case of file, that here we open that file, right? And we want to close it. It really depends on a lot of kind of scenarios, but what it allows us to kind of, if you open the file, to quickly close it. Make sure to read about like stream readers. You can Google about this. Like stream readers can be quite helpful to read about. You'll see a lot of examples with opening files and all of these operations. Also, you can Google about iDisposable so you can understand why you should dispose your objects. And that will also teach you some things about garbage collector. And also you can Google about the using keyword itself, right? So that will show you like what it does behind the scenes. So it's really important for you just to understand it better. Of course, you can use it without understanding what it is, but I think it's a bad thing. I will always try to dig deeper so I understand it inside out, and eventually I can basically understand all of the exceptions that are thrown at me. So here we're simply create share parameter file. Then once we get access to the share parameter file, so here from the definition, we have create group. And another way of navigating to this, we can hold control and click on it. And as you can see here, I've created a static class called definition file extensions. And here I have a lot of extension methods. And what I have there is simply like methods that kind of extending, giving this class more capabilities, giving more options to be used. And here I just again do some validations, check if group exists. So before adding the group, you may want to check it. And this is the way I do the validations. And here I simply create, if that was already exist, if that already exists, I simply throw an exception. And if not, I simply create a new group. Again, before making you see all of this, that's the way we went through each step and make it within one scope. And now we try to make it better. We try to break everything into parts so eventually it is not only easier to read but also easier to modify because we have these small chunks and eventually it's going to be easier to modify. This is what actually solid principles uh, tell us at the end of the day. So their main idea is to have have like small classes, and each of them should have only one responsibility. So you don't throw everything at one portion and everything is kind of unreadable. So we're creating share parameter file. Also, you can click Control Tab to go back to your previous tab. Then we're saying, okay, once we have the group, we want to add external definitions. So external definitions is simply they're just like like we call them parameters. Usually if you're like a BIM coordinator or just a BIM user, we call these parameters, but from the programming point of view, from the programming perspective, we call these definitions. And here again, we're doing null checks. Again, make sure to do this. And we're simply utilizing the method create external definition because sometimes you want to create the you want to create a we want to add just one external definition. So we say I have this group and I want to add with this definition name and parameter type. As you can see here, we don't pass this interface. We simply say I want to have the name and the parameter type and just add this. Again, we do some validations, but they pretty much the same. But when we add multiple, instead of passing like a list of tuples, for example, I pass a list of our own interface that's simply responsible for storing the name and the parameter type. So here we go through each of these configs and say, you know what, take that group that we passed and create external definition. And for that, I'm going to tell you the name and the parameter type. And that's it. So as simple as that, really easy to read and really easy to understand. So once we have our external definitions, we're saying try add to document. So if you go inside of this, here you can see what we're doing. Here we're saying we're also do the null checks. So we're checking the if it is null. So we're doing all of this null checks. And then we're going through each of the external definitions that we passed here, and we say create a binding. So what is binding responsible for? We'll learn with you that binding basically tells us what is it a type or an instance. So the parameter that we are adding to our document is that should be a type parameter or an instance parameter. And also what binding tells us is what categories should be set for this, because we know that we can add parameters to a Revit document either from the share parameter file or from the parameter itself, right, in the document. So if I go to Revit and I go project parameters and I click add, I can choose whether it should be from the project parameter, it should be a project parameter or a share parameter. But keep in mind that we have one limitation, that we cannot add these as a project parameter via code. We use only share parameter option. So here I'm saying create binding. It's also an extension method. So this is what it looks like. What it does, again, does all of the validations, create the category set, and returns it. And returns instance binding on type or type binding. But what you may notice is that there's some sort of like binding kind. And the first question that you may have is that something that Revit API provides us with, or is that something that you've created on your own? And that is something that is my own thing, right? It's a simple enumeration. So here you have public kind, which is just an enumeration, type, an instance. So we could have used a Boolean here that would be like is instance or is type. And a lot of people do this. But whenever I want to use Boolean as my argument, as my parameter to a method, I usually go with an enumeration because it's way much easier to read. For me right now, I understand that I have instance and I have type. So when I have a lot of execution paths, execution path means when I have a lot of ifs, right? If this, if this, if this, I use polymorphism. So basically, I create one common interface and I have different implementations for this. So this way, I'm making sure that my class is responsible only for one thing. So I'm not violating the single responsibility principle because each one is responsible for one thing. And I'm also not, I'm also allowing the user to create some extension things, right? So he can easily extend this by simply implementing the interface. So just want to show you here that whenever you want to use Boolean, maybe you need to think about using an enumeration. Maybe it can be better. Okay, so here, okay, let me go back there, try add. So here, uh, okay, here we've learned how do we create that binding, and then we're using the method that Revit API provides us with. So we're saying, give me the access to all the parameters that we have in the given document and insert one. And we're saying that's the external definition I want to use, that's the binding, and that's the parameter group. So not that complicated. If you go step by step and learn this on your own, actually everything that I've shown you here was covered in previous lessons. What we did is only break down everything. So you can actually understand how to make it more readable and easier for the users to comprehend everything that you have written. So everything looks great. And here, what happens also if you, for example, as you may notice that here we have instance as the default. So I don't want to pass it here. So if I remove this one, it's going to throw an error because it accepts as the third parameter it accepts a binding kind, but it got built-in enumeration. So what we need to tell here is that we need to say that, you know what, I want to pass not the binding kind, but I want to have built-in enumer wait a minute. What do we parameter group? Parameter group. So this way you can be explicit and you can tell what parameter it should equal to. Or you can say even binding kind and send what the binding kind you want to use right there. So instance, for example. So that's the way how we can use it. So if I run this, and again, you remember that this run method is simply an extension method that we have written with you. It simply makes that easier to use transactions. So instead of creating using a transaction, like I simply created an extension method called run and we use it from here. So I'm gonna compile this. I'm gonna go to Revit. Now I don't see anything here. My share parameter, I don't have it. It's empty. Here, as you can see, I don't have anything. So if I run this, I click AF because I have already used that command. So I'm simply using this option from the add-in manager instead of this one because I've already used that. And if I go to API library right now, I can see that that file has been generated, that my wall has two of these parameters, length parameter and angle parameter, my floor as well. If I go to manage and if I go to project parameters, I have two of these parameters here. So if you go to modify, you can see that they have been taken from the share parameter. They are instance, they have wall, and they have floor. And that's the parameter group that we put it under. And if I open share parameters, it was set. And basically, that's the way we do this. So I hope that it is clear that you kind of really need to make sure that everything works as perfectly as possible in terms of everything works as readable as possible and everything works at all. And also why I've named this try because what it does, that insert method, if it's unsuccessful, it will return false. So in that case, I just want to like, skip it because it's not gonna throw exception, so I just want to skip it. That's the main reason being for this. So I hope that is clear right now. So what everything should look like. So make sure to make everything as readable as possible. Make sure to understand everything that we went through. So you can understand that code better. And again, you can actually write tons of like extension methods and really make use of them and create your own library and even publish this so user can use it like we use Revit API library. So you can create your own API and make sure that that works perfectly. That's it for this lesson. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and have a beautiful day.